Every day, in every city, in every country, young, beautiful girls are missing, victims of the blackest racket the world has ever known. House of 1,000 Dolls, capital of license and licentiousness, where all man's pleasures, where all man's depravities can be gratified. No one escapes from the House of 1,000 Dolls. And those who try feel the torturous punishment of the sadists who traffic in human slavery. Vincent Price, Martha Hyer, George Nader. Focus the world's eye on the hidden world of disappearing women.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that's...
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And today's episode is on House of 1,000 Dolls from 1967.
House of 1,000 Dolls was directed by Jeremy Summers and written by Peter Welbeck, that being a pseudonym for producer Harry Alan Towers. And House of 1,000 Dolls was produced by Louis M. D. Heyward and Harry Alan Towers.
House of 1,000 Dolls stars Vincent Price as Felix Manderville, Martha Hyer as Rebecca, George Nader as Stephen Armstrong, Anne Smyrner as Marie Armstrong, Wolfgang Kieling as Inspector Emil, Sancho Gracia as Fernando, Maria Rohm as Diane, Luis Rivera as Paul.
Also appearing are José Jaspe as Ahmed, Juan Olaguivel as Salim, Herbert Fux as Abdu, Elena Samarina as Madame Vera, Diane Bond as Carmen from Rio, Andrea Lascelles as one doll, and Ursula Janis as another of a total of 1,000 dolls.
There were like 20 dolls max. House of 1,000 Dolls opens with a Samuel Z. Arkoff Presents title screen, and we see an old-fashioned hearse driving down a deserted street.
As the credits start to roll, the hearse continues and rolls up to a house.
Actually, it rolls over the camera first, and then it goes up to a house.
When it stops, the driver gets out and rings the bell, and two other men approach the back of the hearse. A woman answers the door as the two men pull a coffin from the back of the hearse.
They carry the coffin inside the house and lay it on a table. Standing around the coffin are Felix Manderville and Rebecca. They've been waiting for this. There are a few other people around there too. Felix asks that the coffin be opened. Once opened, everyone peers inside.
Felix asks where this one comes from, and someone replies, Paris.
And the point of view changes from inside the coffin to outside, and we look down and we see a girl in there. Felix snaps at his fingers, and she opens her eyes, and then she screams.
Then we cut to kind of an outdoor cafe. There's a photographer in a fez. This is Abdu. He's taking pictures of the patrons, and some of them are more amenable to this than others.
The first couple he talks to is happy to do it, and even take the photographer's fez so that they can pose for the picture. And then we move to the next table where a man is complaining. His name is Fernando, and he's telling his friends that he went to the police, but they couldn't help him. They didn't take him seriously.
Fernando's friends are Stephen Armstrong and his wife Marie. And Fernando says that he came to Tangier because he had received an anonymous phone call that he would find his fiancée here. His fiancée, Diane, was kidnapped in Vienna and brought here to Tangier.
The man who sent the message to Fernando found Diane in a brothel and promised her that he would get the message out. Marie says that she thought white slavery went out in 1890. Obviously, it didn't.
Fernando has a plan. He has a friend here that was going to take him to every brothel in town until they find her. But Stephen says every side street in Tangier has a brothel.
Yeah, so where's he going to start? I just want to point out at this point that there is some traffic noise in the background that was obviously added in for post, and it is so very distracting. It sounds like they're sitting in front of 100 beehives. It's some loud, buzzing, grinding noise. It's so distracting. Fernando says that he has a friend who's going to take him to some likely places. At this point, the photographer approaches, and Abdu asks the group if they want a picture. They say no, and he insists on taking it anyways. But then they have to get rude to get rid of him. Marie even puts her purse in front of the camera lens so he can't take the picture.
But then the photographer walks over to the other end of the table and takes a candid shot of the trio as they continue their conversation.
Fernando takes his leave. Stephen wishes him good luck in his search, but says that he and Marie will be there for a couple more days and to let them know if he needs more help. And Abdu comes back to the table saying that this picture is a masterpiece. Stephen looks pretty grumpy, but Abdu gives him his card and says the picture will be ready tomorrow. After Fernando gets far away from the table, but still in the shot, Stephen says that he hopes Fernando doesn't get himself killed.
Marie asks what he means by that, and Stephen says that things like that have just been known to happen in a tourist trap like Tangier.
Tourist traps are where you get overcharged for everything. You're not supposed to get killed. That's really bad for tourism. Then Stephen and Marie leave, and Abdu, still there, declares that they are terrible people, tourists.
A black car is now arriving at the House of Dolls. Standing outside are Felix Manderville and Rebecca, along with Madame Vera. Madame Vera reports to Felix that the King of Hearts is pleased with the work they've done.
Felix says, that piece of news has made my day, in a way that makes you think he's probably being sarcastic. Madame Vera frowns and says that the King of Hearts pays well and we should be grateful.
Then Felix laments that they could have had the greatest variety act if they hadn't gotten caught up with the syndicate.
But Rebecca says, instead we have the greatest magic act in the world. So isn't that basically the same thing?
He and Rebecca start for the car to head to the club, but Felix turns around and tells Madame Vera to give their regards to the King of Hearts. But how can she? Nobody knows who he is.
This is a great scene where we see her in the reflection of his sunglasses, and they even zoom in so it's the entire frame. But that made me wonder if Madame Vera just relayed a message from the King of Hearts. Why can't she get a message back to him via the same channel? But Felix just says, how well we know, and then they get into the car and head off.
Where they're heading off to is where they will be performing the greatest magic act in the world that evening.
But currently there's some can-can dancers on stage.
Fernando is there with his friend Paul. Fernando tells his friend that he was promised girls, special girls.
Paul says that he's being impatient, but he signals the waiter anyway so they can pay and leave. Paul takes Fernando backstage amidst all the dancing girls who are headed to the stage.
He points to a door, and then they open it, and
the door says showgirls.
And this is the showgirls' dressing room. Paul sneaks up behind one woman and covers her eyes and says, guess who? And she correctly guesses Paul.
And there's that strange hum in the background of this scene, too, where there's just a bunch of girls getting ready to go on stage. The stock background noise, I guess. We'll hear it many more times, unfortunately.
Yeah, they use this sound instead of the rhubarb peas, rhubarb carrots, rhubarb.
The woman is delighted to find out who just accosted her. Paul asks if she and a friend could go out with them, but she says no, she has plans. So Paul asks her for 2 other girls. She whispers something in Paul's ears, and he looks delighted to find out what she's saying.
Fernando has been wandering around the room, inspecting all the other girls. He comes up and Paul introduces him to this woman. He does not introduce her to him, so we have no idea who she is.
Yep, she doesn't get a name ever.
Then Paul whispers something into her ear, and she looks at Fernando and says, it's very expensive. And Fernando says, it always is.
Paul asks if there will be any problem getting in. And the woman reaches into her bag and pulls out a small doll. Not if you show them this, she says. And Paul thanks her and they leave this incredibly loud room.
As they leave, Fernando asks where they are going, and Paul tells him to the House of Dolls.
And they say this right in front of Abdu, who happens to be backstage too. And he's not the only one back there. We also see Felix going to his dressing room.
Inside, Rebecca is primping, and she tells Felix that he was careless in speaking about the King of Hearts in front of Madame Vera today. But he isn't concerned because he feels his act is the perfect cover for this operation. But Rebecca tells him that even Felix is expendable and replaceable to the King of Hearts.
Felix asks if that would bother her, and she says yes. She says they've been together for a long, long time. A pleasant time, asks Felix, and she confirms that it was by kissing him.
Rebecca asks why they don't try to break away from the organization. They have enough money. But Felix shuts her down, reminding her that she herself was once an inmate of the House of Dolls. And she knows the business inside and out. But the King of Hearts is new to this organization, and he might not see her value as he does.
Yeah, one slip of the tongue, and she would be considered dangerous. She could get sent away. And Rebecca doesn't want to go anywhere without Felix.
Felix and Rebecca head outside where they are stopped by a man in a tan suit.
The man yells, "Manderville," and Felix turns towards him.
He pulls out a gun and says he's going to kill Felix, and Felix inquires as to why.
As he walks towards Felix, Felix asks if they can go somewhere to talk about it.
And this man explains that he's been hunting him down because a young lady friend of his had attended Felix's performance in Vienna and was never seen again, and he's certain that Manderville is responsible for her disappearance. Felix asks if he has any proof of this accusation, and the man produces a doll from his jacket. "A doll," Felix says, amused. "May I see it?"
As the man, whose identity we will never know, approaches Felix, as he looks at the doll, a bodyguard appears from the alley and drags that surprised young man off. Felix shields Rebecca's eyes, as the man is injured in some way. The next time we see him, he's being thrown down into a bathtub full of water, and blood leaks out him at an alarming rate.
Next we see Paul and Fernando have arrived at the House of Dolls. Paul rings the bell, and Ahmed peeks out. He asks, "What's your business?" And Fernando says they've come to pay a visit to the House of Dolls. Ahmed asks for their pass, and Paul shows him the doll that the woman had given him backstage at the club. So Ahmed opens the door and lets them in.
Ahmed takes the doll and puts it on a shelf, which is sitting by the door, and he shows the men to a parlor. Madame Vera arrives to present her doll collection. She takes them to another room, seats them in front of a two-way mirror. She says that they are looking into the Hall of Dolls, where they have an international collection for their delight.
She then introduces the dolls one by one as they take turns looking in the mirror.
They do a little primping in front of the mirror. This is a show for the men's benefit. There are women from Munich, Paris, Rome, Amsterdam, Athens, Rio. And then Madame introduces her newest girl, Diana from Vienna. And Fernando jumps up.
He tells Madame Rivera that he has made his choice. He'll have Diane from Vienna. And Paul picks the girl from Amsterdam.
They're alone for a few moments, and Fernando tries to tell Paul the real reason that he's there, but there's no time because Madame Vera returns and takes him to Diane. Diane looks surprised to see him, but happy. They're still in the room with Ahmed, who is regarding them suspiciously. They do try to play it cool while Ahmed is there. He pours some champagne, and then very slowly backs out of the room.
Diane closes the blinds and then goes to Fernando. She's very glad to see him and tells him that he's got to get her out of there. The problem with her saying things like that is that the room is bugged and Madame Vera and Ahmed are listening in another room.
Yeah, we see a zoom in on what looks like a speaker, but I guess it's a microphone. So we cut to where Madame Vera and Ahmed are listening. Madame Vera says that she was afraid of that girl, and Ahmed says he will take care of her. The madam says that he should take care of Fernando, see to it that he never reaches the police.
The next morning, Fernando goes downstairs. Ahmed stops him and asks if he's leaving. Fernando says yes, and can he use the phone to call a taxi?
Ahmed rubs his fingers together because Fernando forgot to pay. I guess they didn't get it up front. Once taken care of, Fernando asks if he can use the phone.
Ahmed tells him that the phone is out of order, but he can make a phone call at the corner. Then, when Ahmed isn't looking, Fernando takes one of those dolls from the shelf before heading outside.
And there's no sign of Paul, so we don't know if he and the girl from Amsterdam are still at it. Fernando walks through the corner, and then suddenly 2 and then 4 men appear.
All wearing robes and fezzes.
Fernando realizes that he's in trouble and starts to run. And for some reason, he chooses to run into a junkyard. There's a bunch of scrapped cars there.
Wherever Fernando has chosen to hide in this junkyard doesn't work out for him because one of the men is lighting a makeshift torch and setting everything on fire.
He tosses it into one car, and that car explodes, and that leads to more explosions, and soon everything is burning. And then we see Felix crawling out from underneath the car. He's luckily unburnt, a little sooty, but unluckily, when he turns around, he finds one of the thugs. That thug raises a weapon over his head and brings it down on Fernando.
Back at the House of Dolls, Madame Vieira enters a rare quiet room where that sound effect isn't going on and says, "Silence!"
She goes over to Diana and asks if she knew the man from last night. Diana refuses to answer, despite being ordered many times to say something. So Madame Vera directs 2 of her thugs to grab her. Carmen, the girl from Rio, jumps to Diane's defense.
But that doesn't work out for Carmen because then she and Diane are both dragged away.
Now we see Stephen. He's arriving at a riding school where Marie is practicing horseback riding in a paddock.
Stephen helps her down from her horse, and she takes it back to its stable. And then a police constable goes to Stephen and says he'd like to speak with him. Marie returns and asks what's going on, and Stephen explains that the police want to talk to him.
Yeah, he was wondering how he was going to spend the rest of his afternoon. Marie gets curious and asks what's the matter. Stephen just tells her to go to the casino that night if he's not back in time. He'll meet her there. She protests, but Stephen says she can't possibly stay in her dull hotel looking at dingy walls all evening. And there's an awkward moment where all three of them just stare at each other. And then Stephen crabs, well, let's go. The policeman takes Stephen to the morgue and tells the attendant to bring him number 47. The attendant brings a box of effects and hands it to Stephen. Stephen asks why they think that the dead man is his friend. And the cop says, we could be wrong. That is why you are here, to make a positive identification.
So a body is pulled out and Stephen positively IDs Fernando. Then Inspector Emil comes in and dismisses the constable.
The inspector asks Stephen why he's in Tangiers, and Stephen says he's on vacation with his wife. Inspector Emil assumes that Stephen's wife is American, but Stephen corrects him. She's Danish.
And then Inspector Emil notes that his friend Fernando was a Spaniard from Madrid. And Stephen explains that most Americans like foreigners.
This must have been written a long time ago.
Inspector Emil asks how long Stephen had known Fernando, and Stephen says a number of years off and on. They had gone to medical school together in Madrid.
And then Emil asks if that means Stephen is a doctor, and Stephen doesn't answer. He wants to know how it happened, and Emil says all the signs show that there was a fight that your friend lost. Stephen wants to know more, and Emil says one looks for every detail in a case like this. Like what, Stephen says? Murder, says Emil.
Inspector Emil asks if Fernando was a gambler. Stephen says no. Why? And Emil says that a playing card was found by the body. A king of hearts.
Oh, interesting. Stephen asks if there will be an arrest soon, but the inspector tells him that such matters should not concern him. He tries to dismiss Stephen, but that makes Stephen mad. Fernando was a very close friend, and he's going to make this case his concern, whether the inspector likes it or not. So you're going to interfere in the investigation, asks Emil? And Stephen yells, bingo! Emil says, but you're just a doctor. I don't prescribe for your patients. Why do you presume that you can investigate?
Stephen explains that for 10 years his practice was in criminal pathology, so for 10 long years he's worked with caps.
And they don't impress him much. The inspector leaves, and we see that Stephen has recovered a doll from Fernando's effects. In
her room, Rebecca is awakened by a knock at the door. She goes to the door, and it's Felix. He tells her that it might be time for them to leave. Madame Vera had called to say that there had been a killing.
Rebecca wants to know who, and Felix says it's the fiancé of the girl from Vienna. He was on his way to the police when he was killed. Felix says it's just a matter of time before the police get a clue that will implicate them.
Rebecca is silent. Next, we see that Diane and Carmen, the girl from Rio, have been bound and placed apparently in a whole wing of the house. And Rio is using some sort of machinery with a spinning wheel to cut her ropes.
Yeah, that was pretty convenient to be dumped there.
Well, I don't think they were dumped in that room specifically, but this is a really open floor plan that they're quote-unquote imprisoned in.
Right, and their hands are tied, but they probably could get around.
There are several rooms, there are stairwells, so they have unfettered access to at least this area.
I think it's maybe an attic space. After the gears free, Carmen, the girl from Rio, she unties Diane, and then they start poking around in their rooms. They find a storage room with a bunch of junk in it, and that window is open. They look outside and find that they're pretty high up. But Carmen asks her to look for some rope. Perhaps they can escape that way.
They find some, and Rio says that she'll go because in her former life before the House of Dolls, she used to be an acrobat.
Diane ties a rope around Carmen's waist, and she goes out the window and starts rappelling down the wall. However, Ahmed and his thugs approach while she's doing this.
Diane lets go of the rope, but Carmen, the girl from Rio, is close enough to a balcony that she's able to drop there safely.
Then she climbs down the wall the rest of the way. But she's instantly set upon by some more thugs. She tries to beat them back with garden implements and looks like she might succeed. She gets to the outside wall and starts to scale up it. But more thugs arrive and they pull her down by her nightie, which gets ripped off.
She looks like she's willing to put up another fight until a third man comes up with 2 vicious German shepherds, so she surrenders and the men take her away.
In Felix's dressing room, he receives a telegram. The message has come from the morgue.
It says the man that was killed had one of their dolls in his possession when he was killed, and that the doll is now in the possession of a Stephen Armstrong. And Stephen's wife is there in the audience for tonight's show, alone. Felix is getting nervous. The police could be snooping around, and he doesn't like that.
Rebecca says, you know what you must do then. Felix protests. There's a police investigation going on. But Rebecca is firm, and Felix gets ready to go out on the stage, agreeing to do whatever he must.
Now it's showtime.
Woohoo!
The great Manderville is introduced.
And he in turn introduces his glamorous assistant Rebecca with a poof of smoke, making her appear. And then he also introduces his other assistant, Salim. Another poof of smoke.
He's going to start out with a demonstration of telepathy. Rebecca is blindfolded and describes the patrons of the club.
In very accurate and very precise detail.
Eventually, the great Manderville gets to Marie.
She's sitting alone at a table, and Felix asks her to be part of their next illusion.
She's reluctant, but he's persuasive.
Well, he asks the audience to cheer for her to come on stage, so doing a little peer pressure there.
So as she follows him to the stage, Stephen comes in.
But not in time to stop her. Marie is put into a glass box on the stage. Felix walks in front of it, raises his cape, and when he lowers it, the glass box is empty. And the curtains close. I guess that's the end of the show. What a ripoff. It was like 4 minutes long.
Stephen immediately starts trying to track down his wife.
Yeah, he pays a bouncer $1 whole American to divulge where he can collect his wife. Apparently he has to go outside because we see him walking down an alley outside the club. And then he goes into a backstage entrance where he has to tip the attendant sitting there again. And he trots up to the stairs to the dressing room area.
Stephen knocks on the door and enters. Rebecca is inside, and Stephen explains that he's there for his wife. She disappeared as part of their act, and he would like to retrieve her.
Rebecca says she thought Marie was alone. And Stephen stresses that, no, she was waiting for him.
At this point, Felix and Salim come to the door, and overhearing the conversation, Felix tells Salim to get the girl.
Rebecca tells Stephen that Marie must be back at her table by now, but Stephen doesn't believe that.
Going inside, Felix asks, "May I help you?" And Stephen says, "I hope so, Mandrake."
Felix corrects him that his name is Manderville and asks, why the hostile attitude? And Stephen takes a deep breath and says that he can get a lot more hostile.
Stephen says that he wants his wife, and Felix explains that she's all right. But she had an accident backstage and fell and was stunned, but she's all right now.
And Salim is bringing her there. The door to the dressing room opens, and Salim escorts in a disheveled Marie. She's covered in dirt and her hair is coming undone. Rebecca pretends to be shocked, and Felix asks how they can make it up to them.
Rebecca says that nothing like this has ever happened before, and Marie says no worries, and Rebecca takes her into the other room to freshen up.
This leaves Stephen and Felix alone. Felix makes Stephen a drink. And Stephen, looking around, sees a deck of cards on the table, and every single one of them is a king of hearts. It doesn't look like a playing card, though. They're actually very large in size.
Like the kind of stage a magician would use so people in the back can see.
But usually a deck of cards should consist of more than one card.
Stephen commends Felix on his choice of brandy, and Felix says that he's cultivated good taste in almost everything, especially life. To be dead would be such a bore, don't you agree?
I wouldn't know. Stephen apologizes for his hostility and says he's not asking for pity, but he's kind of stressed out right now because his best friend was killed today. Felix wonders if maybe it was a street accident, but Stephen says no, he was murdered.
Marie overhears this and runs in and asks if that's why the police came to the riding school this morning, and Stephen confirms that this is so. He tells her he's got some things he'd like to look into, but she should go back to the hotel.
Felix says surely the police should handle this, but Stephen says that he doesn't have faith in the police, and he's on the case. And then he kind of gives away everything by showing off his clue. He has the doll that was in Fernando's effects, and he also reveals that there was a King of Hearts playing card found near the body. This causes Felix to turn to Rebecca, and the two share an unspoken message.
Stephen says that Fernando had begun his search at local nightclubs, and so he will do the same.
Felix has taken his cane, coaxed by Rebecca, and offers to help Stephen. He knows Tangiers better, and Stephen, who's just a tourist, agrees. Marie exhorts Stephen to be careful, and Rebecca offers Marie a ride home. Felix says, I think we'll be safe, and he holds up his cane, and we see that it's also a sword with a blade coming out of it.
So first, Felix takes Stephen to a club with annoying music and a belly dancer.
Well, the music is annoying, but the crowd noise is even more annoying.
Well, it's the music too. It's so loud that we can't really hear the conversation that they have. Abdu the photographer is there, because if there's one thing we've learned from AIP movies, a nightclub is a great place to have your picture taken, such as in Coffee and Blackula. Stephen is able to purchase the photograph of Stephen, Marie, and Fernando from yesterday. It's now developed and ready.
It will be useful as they try to see if anyone recognizes Fernando from the other night.
Stephen asks Abdu if he's seen him. Abdu says no. Stephen figures someone is bound to recognize him from the photo. Having found out everything they can from the patrons of that club, they go to another. And instead of a harem girl taking off her clothes, this club features mud wrestling. They take a seat and Felix excuses himself. As he leaves, Abdu the photographer comes in, grabs a sip of Stephen's drink, and sits down next to him. "Don't you ever give up?" asks Stephen.
Apparently not. And though Abdu had previously denied seeing Fernando after taking his picture, he's now willing to tell Stephen that he knows where his friend went that night. But someone else is listening. It's the owner of the club, Mr. Luke. We see Mr. Luke walk off, probably going to make a report to somebody. It seems like everyone is part of the network of spies in this town. Abdu gives Stephen a slip of paper with an address and says, "Come tonight."
From across the room, Felix looks back and also sees Abdu has handed something to Stephen. He then turns to speak with some of his thugs. I think they're the same ones that Carmen and Diane had scuffled with as they were taken to the prison area of the House of Dolls.
Possibly, but there's a seemingly inexhaustible supply of thugs in this movie. Mud wrestling's over, and Felix has lost his bet. He owes Mr. Luke $1,000.
Stephen says that he's had enough of this place, so he and Felix leave.
Well, Felix had told Stephen that his friend had not been seen there that night, so they leave. Outside the Club Red, Felix offers Stephen a ride home, but Stephen declines, despite Felix's warning of the dangerous streets. Nevertheless, Felix gets into a cab and drives away, and Stephen walks down the street.
As Stephen is walking, he's not going to his hotel, but to the address that Abdu had given him.
And he's being followed.
We see that he's being followed by 2 men. Stephen becomes aware of this and, rounding a corner, waits for them to approach. He trips one of the men, and when going for the second, sees that it's Inspector Emil.
He didn't just see him, he heard him. The sound effects are so loud.
Stephen tells him for a policeman he's not very discreet.
But Emil says that they weren't attempting to conceal themselves from Stephen, only his companion. Manderville asks Stephen. "All is in the realm of possibility," says Emil. He asks Stephen to walk with him. Emil says that he knows the place and the man that Stephen is going to see, but he doesn't know why.
Stephen says that the man won't talk if Emil tags along. And Emil says, "We shall see."
If they clump off down the street, when they get to the address, Emil sends the other cop to wait in the car, and he and Stephen go up the stairs to an apartment. Stephen wonders how Emil knew where they were going, and Emil says that Abdu the photographer is useful for getting information to the cops when it suits him.
They go up the stairs and knock on a door. A voice from inside tells them to go away.
The man inside is in bed. He's bathed in glowing red light. He doesn't want to be disturbed, but Emil lets himself in and turns on the light.
We see that the man is Abdu, and he's in bed with the winner of a German beauty contest.
And also a prostitute. However, now Abdu is claiming that he did not ask Stephen to meet him there. Emil's not going to take that for an answer, though. He takes Abdu's cat and sits down, starts petting it, and he asks about the House of $1,000.
Abdu says he's never heard of it.
Emil asks Abdu if he'd like to be put on a boat to Malta. Abdu would very much not like that. They negotiate for Abdu's information, but Abdu claims to know nothing.
And Emil gives him until tomorrow morning to change his story.
Stephen says, "I told you so." Emil says, "Leave Abdu to me," and Stephen says, "He's all yours."
As they leave, Abdu asks Stephen to turn on the light.
But after they go downstairs and Emil drives off, he rushes back into the building.
But this time, Stephen is met by 2 thugs on the stairwell, the same ones that Felix had spoken with at the mud wrestling club earlier that evening. There's a fight, Stephen wins, and he runs up to Abdu's room and finds it's in shambles.
He looks around and doesn't see anybody, but eventually notices there's a hand poking out of the closet. He goes to the closet, opens the door, it's the dead body of Abdu. Then he hears some sirens. He looks out the window, leaps out. Apparently there's some sort of very large balcony outside Abdu's window, and it's also now daylight. He looks down to the street, but there are no thugs there, just 2 policemen.
Then we cut to Stephen and Marie's hotel. Rebecca is in the lobby and calling up to the Armstrongs' room and talks to Marie. Rebecca tells her that something has happened to her husband and she should come down so Rebecca can take her to him.
Rebecca's limo is waiting outside. Marie hurries down and asks Rebecca what happened. Rebecca says that she'll explain in the car and she needs to hurry. But once in the car, Maria gets chloroformed and passes out. Back with Stephen, he's on the balcony still, and he hears more cops coming. He looks down and sees Abdu's body being taken out of the room. He leans down and hides his little doll in his sock. 2 of the thugs spot him from a nearby rooftop and start to follow him.
He then works on his escape, jumping over rooftops and making his way to the ground, but the 2 goons are following him the entire time. He realizes this and he tries to shake them. He ends up at an abandoned train yard of some sort, and still he winds up face to face with them.
There's very little cover for him there.
They scuffle, but Stephen is able to break away again. And then he runs to a boatyard.
Yeah, they're at the dock. Now he's just pursued by 2 thugs. He fights them off, grabs a high-pressure hose that just happened to be on, puts the spray on one of them, keeping him from attacking, but the other one is right behind him, and he comes up to him, does a light karate chop onto his shoulder, and Stephen goes down, hose still blasting.
The thug flips him over, and they search him, but they don't find the doll. They leave a ransom note for Marie and run away.
It's the old-fashioned kind, which is cut out of magazine headlines, and it reads, "If you ever want to see your wife alive again, don't go to the police. Meet Rebecca in her dressing room tonight 1 hour after the show."
Now back at the House of Dolls, a now captive Marie is brought downstairs to Madame Vera. Vera takes her to where Diane and Carmen, the girl from Rio, are being held.
Yeah, just in case you forgot about them like I did.
And they're still held in that same area with many doorways and a stairwell, but they're just sitting on a bench in the hall.
Madame Vera has already had enough of Marie, saying, "Since you won't answer my questions," which she must have asked off screen because we saw nothing of this, "these 2 will suffer." Carmen has her nightie back. She's not naked anymore, but we do see she has a bra and panties on underneath. The thugs drag both dolls to the torture chamber. Carmen is chained up, and Ahmed brandishes a small crescent-shaped knife, but all he does is cut away Carmen's nightie. But now it's time for a whipping, and I have to say that Madame Vera is really into it.
Marie, not so much. She can only take so much of this before she says to stop, and that she'll do anything they want her to.
Madame Vera tells the thugs to take Marie and Diane upstairs and to cut down Carmen, or unchain her or whatever.
Next, Felix and Rebecca are taking a walk in the park, discussing how tonight will be their final job for the syndicate. And as they're speaking, a little girl tosses a ball to Felix.
Rebecca says that she has wondered at times if Felix was the King of Hearts. Felix says he could be, but he's risking his life to even say that this is his last job for the syndicate.
Felix tosses the ball back to the little girl, saying that after tonight, he will disappear.
As quickly and completely as possible. That's thanks to the money that he's earned by their successful magic act. Last 4 minutes.
Rebecca wants to know what's to become of her if he disappears.
She can't go back to what she used to do. She wants to go with him.
And Felix assures her that he'd never get along without her.
The little girl returns, and they toss the ball a little more, and he pats her head like she's a puppy.
Felix says that he wants to be sure that since tonight will be their final job, that everything goes off without a hitch. He
asks about Marie and Stephen. Rebecca updates him that Marie is imprisoned, and she left the ransom note on Stephen. She's going to take him to the House of $1,000, where he'll be disposed of.
Felix goes off to buy a big red balloon.
As he does this, he asks Rebecca why she doesn't just dispose of him backstage. Rebecca says that's too risky, and she thinks Stephen will cooperate. He's been told that if he goes to the police, his wife will be killed.
During this exchange, he has given the balloon to the little girl, and she almost immediately released it into the air.
And they laugh at her.
And Felix laughs at the misfortune of this poor urchin kid.
And she's not a street urchin. She's just a little girl who's strangely drawn to them. Now we cut to the car wash, where Emil and Stephen are talking in the back of somebody's car, I guess Emil's.
Stephen wants them to go in guns blazing to get Marie, and if they won't go, he'll do it himself. But Emil says that would be signing his wife's death warrant, because it's Stephen they want to kill, so as long as he's alive, she'll remain alive.
He says cooperate with us and all will end well, but Stephen wants to know what he's supposed to do. Emil tells him to keep his date with Rebecca tonight and let her kidnap him. Emil and the cops will be close behind. Stephen accurately determines that now he's the bait. But Emil says with Stephen's help, they'll take down the syndicate and their leader, the King of Hearts.
At the House of Dolls, Maria is meeting her new roommates.
Diana is filling Marie in on her backstory. She's here because she was kidnapped, but through one of her customers, she got word to her fiancé. The fiancé came there, but never followed through on the rescue. And then Marie breaks the bad news that Fernando was killed. Diane starts to break down, and Madame Vera walks in. Madame Vera tells Marie that a message has been sent to Stephen. Tonight there'll be a trade, his life for hers, but Marie isn't going to be set free. She's going to join the dolls.
Now Stephen arrives at Rebecca's dressing room as instructed, but she's greeting him with a gun in hand and says, "You were instructed not to go to the police. Why did you?"
Stephen protests. He didn't go to the police. They picked him up. Stephen tries to bargain. He says, "Take me to Marie." He claims the cops know everything anyways, and soon they're going to crack the case wide open. There's a warrant out for both of them, but but she's still free because he wants to rescue Marie.
He says that if she takes him to Marie now, he can help her escape. But she wants him to help Felix too. Salim is listening to this outside the door. But Stephen agrees to help Felix as well, and so Rebecca is going to take Stephen to the House of Dolls.
Salim tracks down Manderville in an empty room where he's apparently packing up his props. Salim tells Manderville that Rebecca agreed to free Marie if Stephen gets her safely out, but he omits the fact that Marie also asked that Felix be freed too.
Felix is a little distraught to hear this. Are you sure? He asks. This is my answer, says Salim, holding up a playing card. We can only see the back, but Felix thanks him and takes the card.
He walks out, followed by his thugs. Now we see that Rebecca and Stephen are being driven to the gate, but Stephen must wait outside. Rebecca's going in alone.
Rebecca rings the bell, and Ahmed answers and says, "You are alone? You were supposed to bring Armstrong." And she says, "Let me in quickly," and that there's been a change of plans and they have to get Marie.
Ahmed says that Manderville never sent a message about this, but Marie overrides his concerns and scolds him for doubting her.
So Ahmed takes her up to the room, tells her to wait, and says that whether or not Marie can leave is up to Madame Vieira, so he goes to inform her.
Rebecca goes to Marie and rouses her. She was kind of half asleep, and tells her that Stephen is waiting outside and they must get out of there quickly.
They go down the hall, but when they get to the staircase, they see Ahmed admitting Felix. Felix asks if Rebecca is there. Ahmed says yes, and Felix asks if she brought Armstrong with her, and Ahmed says no.
Outside the compound, the cops have arrived. Stephen joins them as they enter.
Rebecca and Marie have gone back to the room of dolls. Rebecca explains that she was once like them and thinks that she can help them escape. And she has the dolls barricade the door with the beds.
However, that's not enough to stop Ahmed and the goons from breaking in. But the girls are going to fight back, sort of slumber party style. At the front door, the police are standing around the outside of the door as Stephen appears in the front of it. When Madame opens the little peephole, she only sees Stephen, so she opens the door and is surprised to see that Stephen is flanked by many cops.
As Stephen and the police rush the house, Stephen asks where is Manderville, and then he sees him upstairs in the hall and starts to chase after him.
The cops burst into the chamber holding the dolls. They try to arrest Rebecca, but Marie defends her, saying she tried to help us.
Stephen catches up to Felix up on the roof, and they scuffle, and a couple of goons join in, so Stephen is outnumbered.
Stephen loses track of Felix as he dispatches the thugs, throwing one down a stairway. Once he's able to chase Felix again, he sees him sort of standing in the shadows, but his cape gives him away. Felix holds up his cane, and now it's a gun, and he shoots at Stephen.
Felix starts his retreat and takes another shot, and Felix runs and tries to climb back in through a window, but this window doesn't really go anywhere, and he ends up hanging over the side of the wall with the stairwell below him.
It's a spiral staircase, and we see down the middle. It reminded me of Vertigo, the movie.
Stephen reaches him, but Felix falls to his death.
Very dramatically, falling through several stories of this spiral staircase. And we can see that he's holding a playing card, too, before he falls.
Everyone is there to see this fall. The dolls, the police, Rebecca and Marie. But Stephen is the first to go down and reach him. He pulls the playing card from the dead man's hand.
Then Rebecca goes over to the body and embraces it. She looks up. She's angry at Stephen because he killed the King of Hearts.
She said that he was going to help them, but now the King of Hearts is dead.
Stephen says there was no King of Hearts, but there was a queen. And to prove it, he holds up the playing card that Felix had been holding. It's a Queen of Hearts, and says that Manderville was trying to tell him that.
Rebecca insists that she was trying to help the girls get away, but Inspector Emil says only because she knew they were coming. He says that she had worked her way up the organization and eventually took over.
You gave the orders, he says. So Rebecca was the Queen of Hearts. There was no King of Hearts. Emil cuffs her, and Stephen throws the Queen of Hearts card down on Felix's dead body.
How rude.
Rather callously. And that's the end, but as the credits roll, we see all the dolls coming down the staircase. They get to escape, so yay! Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about House of 1,000 Dolls from 1967.
House of 1,000 Dolls originated with Harry Alan Towers, who had a script about a magician who sold women into white slavery. Towers made a deal to shoot the movie in Madrid, but needed more cash, so he got Samuel Arkoff at AIP, and through him, Fulvio Lucisano, to put money into the project.
But in the beginning stages, Terence Fisher was announced as the director for this film, and it had the original working title of Sex Romer's House of Dolls. And the original setting of the film was meant to be Victorian England, and the film would be shot in Ireland. But after Fisher was forced to drop out due to illness, Jeremy Summers got the directing gig, and then the production was moved to Spain.
Vic Damone was mentioned as going to support Vincent Price and Martha Hyer, but he ended up being replaced by George Nader. Rupert Davies was also cast in a supporting role, but ended up dropping out.
Filming began in November 1966 in Madrid. The Spanish government had declared that they would never greenlight a movie with nudity in it, so knowing that local censors would prohibit filming, Towers gave them a copy of Abe Lincoln in Illinois instead of their script, and hired an actor to walk around the set dressed like Abraham Lincoln when the censors dropped by.
Local bar patrons were hired to play the dolls, and much of the film was shot in a palace that had once been a brothel, the Paseo de la Castellana. The mansion was also once an official residence of the last Spanish Prime Minister, which was that country's equivalent of the White House, and had once been the palace where King Alfonso held court. After filming, the palace was set to be demolished and replaced by a modern office building.
Vincent Price was initially keen to play a magician again, but his enthusiasm for the project waned once he learned about the more salacious elements of the film. Given that Price's role was merely a supporting one this time, that meant the actor could indulge in his well-known passion for art by visiting Madrid's famed Museo del Prado, and while Price was away from set, the nude scenes were filmed for the German release. According
to Price, in a 1984 interview, he had been signed onto the project without full knowledge of what the film would be about. After his scenes were shot, he was quoted as saying, "Martha Hyer and I were let off, so we went to visit the set and we found that they were making all of the scenes we'd been in, but a pornographic version of it." He added, "I never got to see it."
And we found out that the film originally featured a title theme song written by Don Black and Mark London and performed by Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers. But that song was cut from the VHS release and apparently all subsequent releases.
House of a Thousand Dolls premiered in the U.S. on November 8, 1967, before coming out on March 13, 1968 on a double bill with Mary Jane.
Some taglines from this movie include, "Have you seen this girl? Just one of thousands of young girls who disappear each year, victims of a tragic traffic in beauty and human flesh. What happens to them? Where do they go?
These girls are reported missing and will never be seen again, except in this evil house.
Thousands of young girls disappear forever. You may find them in the House of Dolls." All the newspaper ads for this movie look like missing person reports.
Box Office Magazine recommended theater owners buy billboards with scantily clad women, promising there are more dolls like me at the theater, with showtimes and places. They also recommended staging a 1 doll in 1,000 contest with an all-male panel judging female entrants on the movie's opening night.
AIP, however, had a less salacious contest idea. They asked theater owners to enlist newspapers or radio stations to sponsor a promotional contest, asking viewers to display their mental prowess by naming Vincent Price movie titles, with prizes going to the contestant who can name the most titles accurately.
Another idea involved the Scream contest, with the local DJ asking women to call in and give their best shrieks of terror.
That would have played really good on the radio. The reviews for this film were not that great. The Chicago Tribune called the film not even bad enough to be good. A bargain basement backfire that is strictly discount price. Ouch.
The New York Times described the film as containing routine sleuthing, double-crossing, and chasing.
I guess there's a bit of that. In Mark Thomas McGee's book, Faster and Furiouser, he calls House of 1,000 Dolls quite possibly the sleaziest movie AIP ever made. I don't think that's true, though.
And Box Office Magazine wrote that the title House of 1,000 Dolls might be capitalizing on the best-selling novel Valley of the Dolls, which was soon to be a movie from 20th Century Fox. The review said Dolls will fill the bill in the double feature market quite easily. While this is not as classy as some of Tower's other worldwide efforts, there is the box office draw of the lurid but still innocently detailed storyline, as well as the U.S. box office lure of Price, Howard, and Hyer.
Many of the cast members of this movie appeared in other AIP films. Of course, Vincent Price, it's just too many to mention them all, but we've covered films like War Gods of the Deep from 1965 and The Abominable Dr. Fives from 1971 in previous episodes of the podcast. And one day we'll cover films like Master of the World, 1961, Madhouse from 1974, as well as a number of the post-series of films featuring Price.
Martha Hyer, who portrayed Rebecca, had previously appeared in Pyro, The Thing Without a Face in 1964, Bikini Beach also in 1964, and War Italian Style in 1965.
Our Stephen Armstrong, George Nader, was the star of The Million Eyes of Sumeru in 1967, and Anne Smyrner, who played his wife Marie, was in Reptilicus in 1961 and Journey to the Seventh Planet in 1962.
Maria Rohm, who played Diane, had appeared uncredited in Bang Bang You're Dead in 1965, The Million Eyes of Sumeru in 1967, the film 99 Women in 1969, which was originally distributed by Commonwealth Entertainment, but AIP later re-released 99 Women along with That Cold Day in the Park and Paranoia as a terrorized women triple feature. Maria Rohm also appeared in The Girl from Rio in 1969, which was produced and then abandoned by AIP, a sequel to The Million Eyes of Sumeru.
We might want to mention that Maria Rohm was married to Harry Alan Towers, so they did a lot of stuff together. Maria Rohm also appeared in Marquis de Sade's Justine in 1969. In one of our other reference books, Rob Craig's American International Pictures, A Comprehensive Filmography, he says that he could find no direct evidence of AIP ever handling the film, but several sources cite that they did. So he included Justine for the sake of completeness, and thus so do we. She was in Venus in Furs in 1969, which was originally released by Commonwealth United, but AIP re-released it in 1970, coupling it with The Wife Swappers. She appeared in Night of the Blood Monster in 1970, Dorian Gray, also 1970, Annie, The True Story of Annie Bell in 1973. This was a MAP Film Company release in which she was uncredited, and that's one of the many distribution arms AIP used when they had films that were more adult in nature.
José Jaspe, who played Ahmed, had appeared in Cervantes in 1967.
Juan Olaguivel as Salim appeared in God Forgives, I Don't in 1967, and Marquis de Sade's Justine, uncredited, in 1969.
Diane Bond, who was Carmen from Rio, had appeared as a pajama girl in Pajama Party in 1965.
Producer Harry Alan Towers did several movies for AIP, including Psycho Circus from 1966, Bang Bang You're Dead, also 1966, The Million Eyes of Sumeru in 1967, and that same year he brought us Those Fantastic Flying Fools, also known as Blast Off. And of course he produced the other films we've mentioned that featured his wife Maria Rohm. All right, Jeff, we made it through this movie, but I want to know what you thought of it, using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic.
Well, over the years, I've tried on 4 separate occasions to watch House of a Thousand Dolls, but I had never been able to get through it. On a previous episode of American International Podcast, we covered the film War Gods of the Deep, in which I said of Vincent Price's performance that he seemed to be phoning in that one. Surprisingly, in this picture, he seems to be really putting in an effort. It's difficult to say because we're actually getting an amalgamation of 2 separate performances as all of the audio seems to be overdubbed. Maybe he was just trying to elevate a script that really gave him very little to do. According to film historian David Delval, in the commentary included on the now out-of-print Kino Lorber Blu-ray release of House of a Thousand Dolls, this film was done as a contractual fulfillment, and while Vincent Price was initially excited with the prospect of playing the part of a magician with a dark side hustle, the finished script left a lot to be desired. The soundtrack for this movie is kind of weird, as we've mentioned. It's a noisy film, the sound mix is terrible. It seems like when doing the sound design, they just found a real labeled ambient sound and they used it in the background throughout the film. It sounds sort of like a garbage truck being filtered through a fan and then recorded from inside a tin can. It's really annoying and distracting, and at times so loud it's difficult to make out the dialogue. This effect is noticeable anytime there is a scene in a club. The sound is heard every time there is a crowd gathered, and it sounds like a plane flying around the room. The applause during Felix Manderville's act is particularly strange. It's a pulsing sound that one never really equates with applause. And unfortunately, these sounds are one of the most memorable parts of this movie. When we go over these films in preparation for the podcast, I often find that a movie I liked, I might not enjoy as much when working out the details to talk about it. And likewise, one that I didn't care for may grow on me as I dig a little deeper into the story. And while I'd say that this is the case for House of a Thousand Dolls, the difference isn't enough to change how I feel about it. I can't recommend enough not watching this movie. Though the Blu-ray might be worth tracking down for the commentary featuring the conversation between David Dakota and David Delval, but as for the movie itself, this one is pathetic with a capital P, and I'll probably never watch this again. Now, Cheryl, I'm curious to see what your opinion is of House of a Thousand Dolls.
My thoughts on the movie are that it's just not enough of anything. While the contemporary reviewers may have found it sleazy, in 2024 it comes off as really tame for an exploitation film. The Dollhouse resembles a 60s era high school boy's idea of a slumber party. Women in lingerie, sharing a dormitory, doing each other's hair, etc. There's a mud wrestling scene, which may have been titillating in the late 1960s, but here I just kept thinking about how messy it was. And the film is ostensibly about pretty young women kidnapped, turned into sex slaves. This movie has exactly one scene of perversity, and that's the scene where Carmen is whipped as Madame Vera looks on with excited interest. And apart from that, this movie is surprisingly vanilla. Of course, we watched the American release, which featured none of the nude scenes that were apparently filmed for foreign markets. It's a Vincent Price movie, but it's not a horror movie, and it doesn't pretend to be. But does that mean it's an action movie? Because there are only a few kind of unconvincing fight scenes. Is it supposed to be a mystery? Well, it wasn't hard to figure out who's in charge of the Enterprise. Not that we get any significant clues, but because the film leans so hard into trying to make us think that Felix is the King of Hearts, and it's not Rebecca that's in charge. The acting isn't very noteworthy, except to say that Vincent Price looks really unhappy here, and he may very well be having to act his way through this tepid and routine story. If only he had gotten to do more magic. There was only one scene where he did a magic act, and all he did was introduce Rebecca, who did the real work. In this movie, George Nader is basically playing the same character he did in The Million Eyes of Sumeru, where he was a smarmy, crime-fighting type. And in this movie, I like him just as much as I did in that movie, which is to say, not much. The women in the movie, with the exception of Rebecca and the spunky, castle-scaling Carmen from Rio, don't really make much of an impression. Martha Hyer as Rebecca does do a fine job, but as the script insists that the true nature of her role not be revealed until the very end of the movie, we don't get to see many, if any, scenes of her girl-bossing her syndicate underlings around. That would have been cool. But like you, my biggest gripe with this movie is the sound. And we mentioned the scenes where somebody dubbed in horrible machine noise where there were cars driving or traffic outside or audience applause. It's a grinding, grating, egregiously loud distraction in those scenes. And like you said, it's mixed in at a level higher than the dialogue. After a while, that noise started to make me angry. I just couldn't stand it anymore. It's so irritating. And I guess I'm a little miffed that we lost out on that funky theme song. We listened to it last night, and it's actually kind of fun, but it doesn't go with the movie. I will tell you, there was one thing about this movie that I really liked. The first scene of the movie shows a glossy black hearse decorated with Baroque flourishes, and inside is the coffin containing the body of Diane as she's brought into the House of Dolls. It was only in the film for a few moments, but it was my favorite part. It's a really beautiful vehicle. And after we see that, it's all downhill from there. Like you, I'm going to give this movie a P for pathetic. It's pretty sad that the only thing I liked was one vehicle. Well, I think we've said all we can say about the House of 1,000 Dolls. So until the next episode, I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.